Okay, good afternoon everyone, and welcome to the second of these webcasts that I'm making to celebrate the publication of my second book, The Green Executive. I'm calling the webcast The 7 Habits of Highly Successful Green Business Leaders, and it's really just pulling out 7 important points from the book itself. So, why did I write The Green Executive? Well, I've spent about 14 years in the business of helping businesses go green. And about 5 years ago, I decided to go out on my own, set up my company, Terra Infirma. So I then had the flexibility, and when you're first setting up a company at the time, to indulge one of my ambitions, which was to write a book. So I put all my knowledge that I knew then, which was very practical and operational, into this first book, The 3 Secrets of Green Business, and that was published at the end of 2009. But that publication takes the best part of a year to go from a reasonably well-finished manuscript right the way through to the finished book. So in the interim, while all that was happening in 2009, I noticed something about my clients. And instead of being asked, as I tended to do, to come in and talk to the environmental manager, to talk to frontline staff about engagement, change management, and all those things, I was increasingly being asked to talk to the board, or even run a sustainability workshop for the boards of organisations. I thought, well, that's interesting. This is a definite change, and I had to generate new models in order to talk at that level, more strategic level, rather than basic operational things. And obviously, I was still fired up with the first book in the process of being published. So I thought, well, why not start writing a second book to try and illustrate this leap from a management function up to a strategic boardroom priority that seemed to be going ahead. There was only one problem, of course, which was that I didn't have very many case studies. I'd used up lots of sort of operational case studies in the 3 Secrets of Green Business, and a lot of the case studies that are bouncing about are getting, they're being repeated so many times, they're getting a bit tired, so I thought I'd go out and find some new ones. So I interviewed 18 different people from a very wide range of businesses, from really quite small companies, and we'll come on some of those as examples, right up to some, really large names like Procter & Gamble, Diageo, GlaxoSmithKline, National Express, some really big international companies there. And I chose them a mixture of, who I could get in touch with, plus trying to get a range of different sectors, range of different sizes, range of different approaches. And it was fantastic. This was this is when the book started to fly, because the people I interviewed, they were so honest and forthright in their views. There was no sort of PR blandishments that you tend to get on the websites. And we managed to sort of sneak all this under the PR guardians who would have wanted to get out their their nail files and file off all the rough edges. We had to compromise on a couple of statements that the interviewees made that could have been controversial, but we got away with an awful lot of it. And it was so practical and so personal, the advice I was getting, that it really did permeate the rest of the book. And in this presentation, I'll be quoting from those interviews quite substantially, as you shall see. So, 7 habits of green business leaders. Habit number 1 is understand the business case. They understand the business case as it applies to their business, and they make sure they understand it. And Chris Tuppen, then of Chief Sustainability Officer at BT, a man who the Guardian said was one of the 50 people most likely to save the planet, that you've really got to understand the business case as it applies to your company. Because if you jump in without getting the connection between your core business and sustainability, then it'll never be properly embedded, and you'll fail, because you'll be trying to do something which clashes with your business case. This is the model I developed of the business case originally for some of those clients I was talking about. and then it forms the substantial part of the first 4 chapters of the book. And at the bottom of the pyramid is compliance. I'm very gung-ho about going beyond compliance, but if you get compliance wrong, the whole pyramid collapses. You just have to ask BP or anybody else who's had a major environmental problem in recent years. You still have to make sure you're compliant. Now, above that in the business case is cost savings, and a couple of years ago this was very in vogue, that everybody's going, go green, save money, go green, save money. That's what the message was going out to business. And some companies save an awful lot of money. Northern Foods, who I interviewed, somewhere between £4 and £11 million a year. Others, BT, £100 million a year. Really quite substantial sums of money. Something that some of the interviewees pointed out to me is it wasn't just about revenue. There was a capital issue as well, that asset values on the balance sheet would be higher if your assets are low carbon as we move to a low carbon future, because if you have a very polluting factory or a very inefficient office building or whatever else, that's not going to be as valuable in 10 years' time as one which has a much smaller carbon footprint. So, but the interesting bit was when we moved above that sort of pounds, shillings and pence and started looking at less tangible issues, harder to quantify issues. One that came out very strongly is staff recruitment and retention. People like working for greener businesses, and they like working for businesses and they like staying with businesses that really seem to be tackling these problems. And an awful lot of the interviewees said the main drive actually came from their staff rather than anywhere else in the first instance. And above that, where it starts to get really interesting, is winning new business, whether it's through just simple PR and branding, through to quite the fixed environmental requirements in tenders, particularly in public sector tenders, and certainly here in the UK. Public sector organisations are quite frequently giving up to 10 up to 15% of the score for each tender to environmental issues. So if you're not competing on green, then you're giving people who are a 10 to 15% potential head start. So it's becoming really, really critical. And then new markets for quite a few organisations. There are green niche markets opening up. Obviously there's the whole electric vehicle and renewable energy technology side, but supporting that, there's a huge number of products and services required for the shift to go green. Even legal services. I've found lawyers who have a dedicated team for renewable energy because they saw that niche. They got expertise in renewable energy projects, and it's something they see themselves as specialists in. Just to illustrate the winning new business side of things, this graph, don't worry about getting all the detail. That's not important. But one of the clients I was working with who were looking at sort of boardroom sustainability was our National Health Service here in the UK, which is either the 3rd or the 5th largest organisation in the world, depending on who's counting. But obviously a huge purchaser of products and services. And the blue line disappearing into a pale blue projection is their current trajectory of carbon emissions, but they're meant to be following the orange line down to hit the government target of 80% reduction by 2050. But just look at that reduction that they're expected to hit over the next few years. It's a really steep downward trajectory. And then if you look at what those carbon emissions are made up of, the NHS carbon footprint is 60% in their supply chain. So even if the 18%, the 22% of their travel and building energy use, even if they reduced that to zero, they couldn't hit that government target without still cutting the procurement part of the carbon footprint by 2/3. And effectively, they'd probably have to do it by 80% as well, because that assumes that they managed to get the rest to zero. So from the NHS's point of view, they need their suppliers to cut their carbon footprint, or they'll have to find somebody who will. because there's no other way of meeting the target. So we're moving from this sort of environment used to be a fluffy like to have or on a compliance issue through the state. We've gone beyond the stage of just being a way of saving money. Now it's becoming a really hard business case. Can you win more business? And that's why one of the conclusions from the book is go green, save money for amateurs. That's so 5 years ago. It's now largely about maintaining market position or enhancing market position and not losing to the competition. Right, habit number 2 from these green business leaders is to demonstrate commitment, or walk the walk, as people say. And one of the killer questions I have for my clients is, right, you want to do this, what's your budget? They go, well, we don't really have a budget for environmental things. You say, well, that sign on your foyer wall, on your main building says you're committed to protecting the environment, and you haven't even put a penny in a budget towards it. So I'm quite brutal with them. If there's no budget, there's no commitment. You've got to put your money where your mouth is. A second thing about commitments is it's now going beyond words. It's no longer about we commit to doing X or we will do X. It's we have done X. The proof is in the pudding. And I'll illustrate with that some examples later on. And then there's the whole thing about the personal commitment of the leader themselves. And one hears stories all the time about, company owners who say, we're going to go green, it's all going to be fantastic, and then turning up next week in a gas-guzzling new company car, and everybody just goes, why do we bother? And then you get people like the Google founders, they're worth $1 gazillion each, but they are pumping money into renewable energy projects, pumping money into energy efficiency for their server farms, and they also, like to be seen out in their Toyota Priuses doing the right thing. And there's the whole Hollywood thing a couple of years ago of the stars turning up in Priuses at Oscar night just to show how committed they are. But that sort of commitment is very important from your personal behaviour and attitude as well. And resulting from that, a lot of the people who took part in the interviews, and I'm just going to pull out Sally Hancock's of Gen 2 here, say, if you're one of these green executives, you really have to feel it. Even though there's a hard-nosed business case, if you're not passionate about it, it'll just disappear into all the rest of the numbers that the board has to deal with. So you should find somebody who's got a bit of fire in their belly in order to do that.